Another day, another round of card reveals. Yes, Riot released more Guardians of the Ancient card reveals today. This is an expansion coming May 5th, mind you, and yes, today is another no camera day. I do feel much better than I did yesterday. I don't feel like my entire body is one giant bruise, and I no longer have the fever, but I do still have a pretty severe headache. I suffer from BPV, and my vertigo has been going off a lot today, and so as a result of those two things, I'm honestly still a bit mentally foggy as I try to even get through this sentence. You can tell it's a bit of a struggle, but we're going to do our best because there are tons of cards to talk about, and there are ones that I am excited about, and so we're just going to dive right into it, starting with Bone Skewer. This is a 2-cost fast spell out of Bilgewater. And it says an ally strikes an enemy, then moves to the top of your deck. And this is a very exciting card, both for some existing archetypes and then also for memes. And so when you can say both of those things in the same sentence, it's going to be a card that I love. So Bone Skewer here, a lot of people are going to jump to the natural conclusion that this card is kind of insane and deep, because not only do you finally get some decent early game removal and potentially additional sources of life gain. For example, if you use this on your life stealing 3/2, for example, you can pay 2, remove an opposing unit, gain some health in the process, and then this card moves to the top of your deck, and that means you get to play it again. And if you're playing it again, that means even more toss triggers. And so for me, I think the real appeal of Bone Skewer, and again, Deep is going to be a deck that wants to abuse this, is anything that comes into play effects. And specifically, what makes Bone Skewer really appealing to me is that you'll be able to trigger play effects, not just summon effects, because it's not flickering in and out like in Spirit's Journey or in Tomb or Hourglass, for example. Because you're actually playing the card again, anything with a straight up play effect, you can get extra bonuses out of. Even late in Deep, you can use this to keep triggering your Obliterate effect, for example. If you're already deep and you play your 7/7, oh, by the way, I'm going to obliterate your unit on the board, and then you Bone Skewer another unit and then you replay it the next round, that is a lot of board control available in Deep. But as I said, there's existing archetypes that like this card, and then there's memes. So you may have heard me in the last video talking about my constant desire to make decks that are going to abuse allegiance effects despite being like deck built around allegiance. And Bone Skewer is another tool that you can use to potentially do that, because it's going to be putting the card on top of your deck. If, for example, you want to then play an allegiance card, you'll know what the top card of your deck is. You'll know whether or not that's going to trigger. And so I'm really excited for that. I'm excited for just some of the non-traditional stuff. On Twitter earlier, I was joking about how, you know, everybody is wanting to do this with Deep, and here I am just wanting to plant more time bombs. Now, I fully understand that using Bone Skewer so that your Zillion can strike for 1 is not ideal, but it is an opportunity to plant more time bombs and get another predict trigger as well. And it is also, and this is something to note as well, a card that you can use to save a unit, because this is not like single combat where they strike each other. So you can play this in response to targeted removal to have your unit hit something and then it goes to the top of your deck. So you can have an opportunity to replay it. Now, that's obviously not going to help you in instances where you have a Thresh, you have a Zoe, you have something where you are waiting for it to see a number of triggers, because obviously you are resetting those. But in other instances where it's just a really powerful unit that you want to save, Bone Skewer also works in that capacity. This is an incredibly powerful card. You should expect to see it in Bilgewater decks because it does so much so well, and I just am excited to deck build with it. Now, we did get another card for Bilgewater that was revealed, and this is Monster Harpoon. Love the name. This is a 6-cost fast spell that says deal 5 to a unit, but on Plunder, I cost 3 less. Now, I have affectionately been thinking about this in my head as the Bilgewater Black Spear, because Black Spear is something that deals 4 to a unit, but you have to satisfy a trigger, but it's normally you pay 3 and deal 4. And in this case, if you satisfy your Bilgewater trigger of Plunder, then you pay 3 and deal 5. Now, it's obviously not the same, because you could argue, rightfully so, that it's much easier to trigger the Black Spear effect in Shadow Isles than it is the Plunder effect. And I would agree with that, but you can't even play Black Spear unless you've triggered the effect, where Monster Harpoon at least gives you the bailout of you can pay 6. So I actually kind of like Monster Harpoon. I don't know what kind of deck it goes into quite yet. I suspect something like a Dreadros control, right? Dreadway Ledros control. It could certainly fit in a deck like that. Maybe some sort of keg control. I don't know. We'll see. It's a great expedition card as well. I know that we like to laugh and joke about quote unquote expedition cards, but the reality is it's really good there. So I'm curious to see whether or not this cracks any lineups, because Black Spear has been making a comeback, obviously because of the popularity of Nasus and the Slay archetypes, but I think this card is not as bad as it might look up front. Paying 3 to deal 5 to something is a pretty big deal. I mean, that's a kill Garen amount of damage, so that's nothing to laugh at. Next up, we have Succumb to the Cold. This is a 4-cost burst spell out of Freljord, and it says frostbite an enemy and summon a frozen thrall. I don't know how I feel about this. So obviously we got the Shurima advanced cards where it was very clear that, okay, you could use a bunch of them to speed up your thralls. And I don't know, maybe they want that to be a deck archetype. Maybe they want a board full of thralls and advancements, and then this is meant to replace your flash freeze. But I have to say right now, this feels really bad, because I don't know why I would ever want to run this over Flash Freeze, or why I would ever want to run this over Three Sisters even. Unless I just really want a Frozen Thrall. But again, Frozen Thralls are weird because you want to play them as early as possible, and so waiting until you have this 4 mana feels kind of rough. And then even still, then your Frostbite effect. It's interesting because Frostbite is the kind of effect that actually becomes more powerful the longer the game goes. As the power of the opposing units goes up because the game is going longer and they're playing more powerful units, or they're buffing the existing units, you're saving yourself from more damage. So the longer the game goes, usually the more powerful your frostbite effects become. However, the longer the game goes, the less powerful ending up with a frozen thrall is, because we don't have great ways to advance Frozen Thrall in a meaningful way, and I don't think that the new advanced cards were enough to justify that. So my instinct is right now, in a vacuum, this is not very good. We shall see. It's entirely possible that I'm wrong and there's some missing piece to the puzzle here, or maybe those advanced cards are good enough. I don't know. I might test that archetype when the expansion launches, just to prove myself right or wrong in one direction or the other. But my instinct tells me playing a bunch of understated units that don't have keywords or any other benefit just to speed up getting 8/8 overwhelms. Like, I was doing the math the other day, and you can end up with, if you play a Frozen Thrall on turn 1, you can end up with one on like round 4. And that's a very great play. An 8/8 overwhelm is nothing to scoff at on round 4, except for that, like, there's already answers by then. You can still frostbite it for a turn or two until you find out whether or not you can remove it. You can, you know, hush it and block it so that you don't have to worry about the overwhelm. You could just take the damage. I mean, it's round 4. It's probably not exactly threatening your entire life total by that point, because you're playing the advanced cards and everything, right? So if you play a Thrall and you play some advanced cards and then you get the 8/8, you're not really generating enough pressure to where the 8/8 hitting you once is a big deal, and so on and so forth. I mean, you could, with spell mana, have enough for a Vengeance by that point. So I don't know. I'm not really sold on this as being an archetype, and this card feels pretty rough. Maybe it's an Expedition card. In fact, I would wager it's going to go in at least one of the like Expedition named archetypes, but I'm not really a fan at the moment. I think the two effects are very on theme for Freljord, but they go against each other, because one you want usually to be playing later in the game, and the other one you want very early in the game. So I don't know. Next up, we have the wings and the wave in the center of the graphic, but we're going to skip it and come back to it because we just did one Freljord card. I want to do the other Freljord card, and the wings and the wave, for whatever reason, whoever put this graphic together, they put that in the center, and then the two cards it references are on the right. So I don't know why that bothers me, but it does. So we're going to skip on over to Buried in Ice. This is a 9-cost slow spell for Freljord. And it says obliterate each enemy to summon a frozen tomb in its place. This is a very powerful effect, and I have already seen some folks jump to the conclusion that you would expect, which is, okay, you play this and then you play It That Stares and you blow up all landmarks and you have yourself a one-sided ruination, which is amazing, and you get a big like 8/8 body out of it. And I understand the appeal of a play like that. You have to remember, you just spent 9 mana and then 8 mana to do that, so it should be a powerful effect. If I spend 9 mana on one round and 8 mana on another round, I should get an effect equivalent to like blow up your board and get an 8/8. I'm sorry, that's the way I feel. That's a lot of mana where you are kind of doing nothing else. You should have powerful effects. So like outside of that combo, it is worth noting that just obliterating each enemy is in and of itself a really powerful effect for finishing things, because frozen tombs don't block. So while this has, control feels, I could actually see this end up being like a one of potential finisher in something like Overwhelm, because if you take away all their blockers and they have like one opportunity to play a new blocker, it's probably not going to be able to deal with a decent sized board, especially if they're units with Overwhelm. So I could see this in a proactive deck, probably not aggro, but I'm thinking mid-range, something like Overwhelm, where you play this as a one of silver bullet just to say, all right, you don't have blockers for a round. It's a possibility. It's also entirely possible it's too slow, and it's also entirely possible that it's not worth the slot, but it's something that I want to test. Being able to remove all of your opponent's blockers for a round is a pretty big deal. And if they've got a full board, it makes it even tougher, because now they have to, just to get a blocker down, they have to overwrite one of their existing units as well, because those tombs take up board space. So it's something to think about. Yes, It That Stares is there. There's other, interesting or cheeky combos, but this is a neat effect. I think it feels appropriate in Freljord, and it's something that they were kind of missing, so I like it. All right, back to the card in the middle of the graphic that's also on the right of the graphic. So this is the Wings and the Wave. This is a 1-cost Shadow Isles follower. It is a 0/1. However, on play, it says play me as First Wave or Last Wind. First Wave is a 0/1, and it says when I'm summoned, summon a prey. So in other words, you can spend 1 mana to get 2 0/1s, or you can play it as Last Wind, which is a 1-cost 3/3 to play me, kill an ally. I like this card because it lets you choose between fodder or not, and there are many times in the Shadow Isles archetype where sometimes you have too many of the cards that require you to sacrifice something and not enough what I call fodder or feeder units. And it also lets you basically have a Bark Beast later on without the extra setup. So like Bark Beast, you have to play it and it's a 1/1 and it's vulnerable while it's a 1/1. And then you have to wait for another card to come along and self-sacrifice a unit, or you have to get into combat or whatever just to end up with your 3/3. Last Wind here says, you know, as long as you've got the unit that I wanted to be the sacrificial lamb of sorts for my Bark Beast, then I can just eat it and I'll get the Slay trigger on top of it. I think that any decks that wanted to run Bark Beast in the past will likely just run this instead. Now, I know that the big Slay deck right now is Nasus Thresh, but that's a list where I've seen some people actually try Bark Beast. I don't know if it's necessarily correct, but I've seen people try it, and I could see them at least going back to trying this as well. The other appeal to this is you could actually, like, I can see a scenario where first wave is actually still a good choice if you have a clunky hand after a mulligan where you end up with like 2 Ravenous Butchers. If you're attacking on odds and you actually have the opportunity to open with 2 Ravenous Butchers against an opponent who doesn't have a Dune Keeper, because like that's the obvious like really annoying counterplay, that's a really powerful turn 1. So the flexibility of this card, I think, is something that Shadow Isles will like, and I think that there's a couple of deck archetypes that will want to try this out. I'm always a big fan of prankster decks and trying to make them work, and it has a lot of good that you can throw into a prankster deck. So I like this card. I think this is a very nice, very fun Shadow Isles card. A lot of it might feel like more of the same, but that's actually good. Some of the best decks in the game are as good as they are because of redundancy, because you want to be able to execute your game plan in more than one way, and this is just Shadow Isles getting more of that redundancy. So I do like this card. But don't fret, gang, because we're not at the end of the reveals. That's right. There were more cards to talk about. So now we're gonna start at the top left of this graphic with Ardent Tracker. This is a 6-cost 3/5 in Demacia, has the elite tag, has the scout keyword, and it says when you summon an elite, reduced my cost by 1. Reduce, not reduced. Again, my brain is a bit addled, so bear with me here. All right, I like this card for its art. Hear me out. I know this is going to sound really bizarre as far as like a thing to highlight, but one of the things that I really like about the look and feel of Runeterra is a lot of times you can look at a card and kind of know exactly what region it belongs to, even without any other context, because they do a great job of utilizing color scheme and utilizing the look and feel of each individual region. And yet, Ardent Tracker here, because it's basically like a forest on fire, and I think there's like a liquid hot magma trail as well. Ardent Tracker is bright red in the art, but this is a Demacia card. This is the first time I think in the history of the game I've looked at a card and went, that's a Noxus card, and then I was wrong. Like, you can look, you know, jumping ahead a bit, spoiler here, you can look at Incisive Tactician all the way to the right, and again, you can kind of see what I'm talking about. You have that red in the color scheme, and that's pretty normal. Demacia usually has a more kind of clean look, like Cithria down below. Piltover and Zone is usually what I call like the neon lighter green, and then lots of yellow. There's a lot of pink overtones when you are looking at your Ionia cards. Obviously, Shadow Isles has a lot of that, what I call villain green. If you've ever seen any Disney movie ever, there's a specific green that like all the villains use when things go wrong. Anyway, again, the color palette normally very, very straightforward for a lot of Runeterra, and I applaud that. But I was just shocked. I saw Ardent Tracker and I said, hey, this is oh, no, it's not a Noxus card. Wow. So art aside, there's not a lot that I can say about this card that I like. The 3/5 stat line with Scout is actually pretty solid, but when I was thinking about this card, like quote unquote in a vacuum, for me, it only starts to really get the value I want out of a card like this when it gets down to a 3 in terms of reduction. I want to be playing this card for 3, because when I'm playing this card at 4, it's basically like our existing scout, but not as good, because I actually think ending up with the Badger Bear after the death is better. It's a bit more easy to disrupt that first attack, I guess, is what you could make the argument there, right? But when I think about our Badger Baron friend, if I can always play that for 4, or I can sometimes conditionally play Ardent Tracker for 4, then I'm going to go with the Badger Bear. And so for me, this card is really, in order to like get itself into value territory, you want this to be cheaper than the Badger Bear in most cases. And so you're looking for a 3 in reduction. Now, the good news is this has a native tag of 6. So if you draw it early, you're going to have a lot of opportunities to get that cost down by playing elites. But the other thing is that it's got that scout keyword, and scout is not usually something you're playing with your elites outside of Jarvan shenanigans. So I don't know. This card feels weird. This card feels like it wants to be in 2 different decks, and it's not good enough to be in either of the 2 decks it wants to be in. Like, that's my gut feeling. I could be entirely wrong. It's entirely possible this is powerful, but I just think about, like, in scouts, I'd still, I think, rather have our Badger buddy. I think I would still rather even run Moose over this card. One cost less, but always at that same cost, but I just straight up get a 5/5. And then again, if I go in the elite direction, I don't know when I'm playing this card and feeling good about it. So I don't know. I don't know. I do suppose that if you've got the blacksmith out, you know, perhaps this being a 4/6, like if I'm paying 4 for a 4/6 scout, that's probably okay. I feel good about that because it's got a lot of health and I can get into combat and mix it up. Maybe that's where the value is, but I just haven't been too high on elites as an archetype competitively, and I don't think this does enough to change it. But speaking of elites, Cithria gets another iteration. Now Cithria has leveled up yet again. So we have Cithria, Lady of Clouds. This is a 10 cost, 10/10 in Demacia. Yes, she is elite. She has the challenger keyword. Says when I'm summoned, double other allies' power and health and grant them challenger. That is a huge effect. You double their health, double their power, and you grant them challenger, so they're just always going to have challenger after that. This is very on par with the Celestial unit that has challenger and then gives your other units overwhelm, in that it's supposed to be a late game finisher. Obviously, giving your other units overwhelm helps you to push damage to a nexus a little bit better, but the fact that she provides your entire team with challenger, that means you can dictate how you want the attacks and blocks to go. So even if you don't finish them that turn, you're likely going to be clearing the board while pushing the best amount of damage you can possible. And you're probably going to get a lot of 2-for-1s because you doubled your attack and doubled your health. And so even in cases where you don't get good 2-for-1s, even if you've got like a 1-drop, maybe you got a Fleet Feather Tracker just chilling there, that jumps up to a 4/2, and it's probably trading with like a 4-drop at that point. So your 1-drop trades with a 4-drop, and you push a bunch of extra damage. The big competition for this card, in my opinion, is Bright Steel Formation. Now, she does have the elite tag, so she has that working for her in the elite archetype. But the reality is, if you're playing any sort of mid-range Demacia, the elite tag is kind of like a nice to have. It's not mandatory. And so you just have to ask yourself, do I want this or do I want Bright Steel, or a mix of the two? Because they're both beautiful top-end finishers. Cithria is obviously a bit more proactive in her approach. whereas Bright Steel just makes your team that much more difficult to deal with, like, for the rest of the game. Like, Bright Steel gives you that continued annoyance, and Cithria, you know, she definitely provides a continued annoyance because she's granting everybody Challenger and she's a massive unit herself, but it's not barrier every time you attack, right? So I don't know. I think her effect is powerful. I certainly want to try her out, but that's the question in my mind that I have to answer is, do I still want to run Bright Steel or her or both or neither when I'm building any sort of mid-range Demacia list? All right, so next up we have, I don't know if this is pronounced Shirian or Kyrian, but it's one of those two. Sump Worker. This is a 2-cost Piltover and Zon 1/2 unit, but it has the elusive keyword. It says when you summon another, I'm going to say Kyrian for now, Kyrian Sump Worker, obliterate me and transform allied Kyrian Sump Workers everywhere into Sump Works posses. So by itself, this is just a 1/2 elusive for 2, which is obviously not great stat-wise, but it's got upside. And the upside is Sump Works posse. So once you've played 2 of these, this reads, it's now a Sump Works posse, 2 mana, 4/2 with elusive, and then it has an attack trigger of deal 1 to enemies and the enemy nexus. This card has me excited. This is a common, and this card has me super excited to build around. Absolutely excited, because this is the first card in a long time where I have thought to myself, I actually want to run like counterfeit copies or all of the other nonsense that Piltover and Zon has, where you are making multiple copies of a unit in your deck. Because not only is this making it more likely that you then find the cards to make them into a posse, but because it transforms copies of them everywhere, that also means that all future versions that you draw will become the posse. And let me tell you, a 2-cost 4/2 elusive with that attack effect is insane. It's absolutely insane. That attack effect is so good because it does not say the ones in combat. It is deal 1 damage to enemies and the nexus. This is basically a Nivea on an elusive unit. This is so good. I am dying to try this card out. Absolutely dying. Now they do have to see each other because it says when you summon another one, you obliterate me, right? So it's not like if you play one and it dies and then the second one you play doesn't like suddenly trigger it. You have to have 2 out at the same time, but there are so many neat ways in Piltover and Zon to copy units and to manipulate units that I feel like there's going to be a deck where I can utilize these. This has me excited, not because I think it's going to be competitively viable. I think this has me excited as a deck builder. Just as somebody who loves a puzzle and wants to try to solve the puzzle, I look at this card and I say, there's a puzzle to be solved here and I can't wait to try it out. That's ultimately what has me most excited about this. It is in Piltover and Zon, so you also will have access to a lot of card draw because that region has it. So finding multiple copies is also right up my alley. It's entirely possible this is the sort of thing where you play one and then you play the other at the same time, right? Like one right after each other. So they have like that one instant moment to answer the first one. Otherwise it triggers. I don't know. It's just a really cool effect. I dig it. Now, the other card that was revealed for Piltover and Zon was Adaptatron 3000. This is a 1-cost 1/3 in Piltover and Zon, and it has the tech tag, which is new, and it says when you summon a tech, we share keywords. And that wording is interesting for a couple of reasons. One, it says we share. So while this doesn't have any keywords, if you give this unit keywords, it would then share it with the other tech that you have summoned. And it should also mean that if I play an Adaptatron and then I play, let's say, a tech with Tough, they're both going to have Tough, but then when I play another tech, let's say the next one has Fearsome, then that one should also then have Fearsome and Tough, because it would be sharing it with the Adaptatron, which would be kind of playing like middleman, if you will. But what's interesting as far as this card goes is that I wonder if we're going to see Heimerdinger get some love, and maybe his turrets will start counting as tech. Because if not, there's, I mean, very clearly more cards that will have the tech tag at some point. But this is certainly the sort of card that only works when you have a wide array. And that's why I immediately thought about the turrets, because, I mean, there's a turret for just about every keyword. This feels like it would fit perfectly into that archetype, and so I don't know. We don't have any other context right now, but this feels like it's going to be meant for a Heimerdinger deck. I don't know. If not, it'll be something similar to that. But that's it for Piltover and Zaun. Yes, that says Circuit Breaker over there, but that's a skill card, and that is the Sumpworks Posse trigger. So even though that's an attack effect, it is worth noting it goes on the stack, just like a Misfortune, just like a Gangplank, just like an Anivia. And so they're just showing you what that card looks like. That does mean that the Sumpworks Posse effect could be denied, could be stopped by a right of negation, etc., etc. But I don't know. I'm still excited to build around that card. Okay, we're going into the home stretch here. Next up, we have Incisive Tactician. This is an 8-cost Noxus card with a 4/5 body. It has a reputation that says I cost 6. So instead of costing 8, it costs 6 if you have reputation. And then it simply reads, when I'm summoned, rally. This is kind of neat because it's a summon effect. So you could try to abuse this with flicker effects like Hourglass, like Spirit's Journey, Entomb, etc. But the reputation only reducing its cost to 6 is kind of rough. It's a 4/5, so it's vastly understated. It's got a very powerful effect, so you expect it to be understated, but it's really understated even at 6, let alone 8. And if I'm being honest, there's a number of cards that currently cost 6 that also potentially give you a rally effect that just don't see a lot of competitive play. And I don't think this is going to break the mold. I feel like this is very much an expedition card where paying more for a rally effect might end up being worth it. But as far as constructed level play goes, I don't know. Just as an example, I don't know why I would ever want to play this card over a Shunpo, where Shunpo is not only cheaper, but I can spend spell mana on it. I don't have to worry about reputation because that 4/5 body is not really it's not something that I'm like, I really got to have that 4/5 body. And the 2 damage from the Shunpo is fine. So I don't know. This feels like an expedition card to me. None of the other 6-cost bodies that also rally have seen much play, and I don't expect this to change that. Last card that we had revealed was Thrashing Snapper. This is going to look familiar in the art because it's basically the Ionia Snapper, but they're chaining this one down. It's Noxus trying to enslave said Snapper. Thrashing Snapper is a 1-cost Noxus card with a 2/1 body. And it says, when an enemy blocks me, give me +3/+0 this round. Now, this doesn't have any keywords. So, bit of a bummer in that regard. It'd be kind of neat if it had something like Quick Attack, because then it makes it very, very hard to block a unit like this. But this is one of those units that is interesting because you want to block it with cheap units yourself. Like this trading with a 1-drop or a 2-drop, not a big deal. But later in the game when you might not have a 1-drop or a 2-drop on the board, this thing starts trading with like Garen or other 5 health units. And that's going to feel really bad for your opponent. But I don't know if that's good enough to make it worth running this card. Because usually if you're running a bunch of 1-drops, you're not thinking about how good they are in the late game. A lot of times you're just trying to get that early presence on the board. So this is very interesting to me because this is a 1-drop that actually does more work for you the later the game goes. This is also a 1-drop that pairs really nicely with Overwhelm effects. Cards like Might stand out. Being able to take your 1-drop into an 8-1 Overwhelm is pretty attractive as far as like using Might. So perhaps some deck will find a home for it. I don't know. There's just a lot of competition in Noxus for 1-drops because they have got some really good 1-drops. So if this makes the cut, I think it's going to be very specifically for decks that want to take advantage of the +3/+0. And the ones that jump out to me would either be Overwhelm decks that want to use Might or Reputation. Because the other key piece of this is that if it is blocked, even if it's blocked by a 1/1 or a 2/1, you're still dealing 5. So Thrashing Snapper is a reputation activator. It helps speed up the process, which is very important in certain decks. And so I think that those are specifically the two. Like I said, Noxus just has a lot of really good 1-drops, and so I don't think traditional aggro cares. I think that this is very much a deck-specific card, and so I think Reputation and decks that want to take advantage of cards like Might are the ones that would end up using this. But that's it for the card reveals. I've made it. I survived. My head is killing me. I'm sure I probably missed some interactions, so for that I apologize. If I did miss something that you're really excited about interaction wise, then just put it in the comments. I am still reading those things. But I love you all. I appreciate you. You made it this far. And until next time, may you walk on warm sands.